Attachment parenting is a parenting philosophy that has been circulating since the early 1990s, and it's one of the more prominent examples of attachment theory's name being borrowed by something that only partially reflects what attachment research actually shows. That's not to say it's bad advice across the board. Some of it is reasonable, and some of it is well-intentioned, but the name implies a scientific grounding that deserves some scrutiny. Hello and welcome to Attachment Maps. My name is Carl and I'm here to tell you things that no one else is talking about. So let's go through what attachment parenting actually is, where the term came from, and then look honestly at what the developmental research says about it. Attachment parenting was coined by an American pediatrician named William Sears and his wife Martha Sears, a registered nurse. Their 1993 book, The Baby Book, became the foundational text for the movement, and they later published the Attachment Parenting book in 2001. The Searses built their philosophy around what they called the baby bees, a set of specific practices they argued would build a strong bond between parent and child. Depending on which edition or source you're reading, the list includes 6 or 7 items: birth bonding, breastfeeding, baby wearing, bedding close to the baby, meaning bed sharing or co-sleeping, belief in the communicative value of a baby's cry, and beware of baby trainers, which refers to avoiding scheduled or controlled approaches to infant sleep and feeding. Some versions add a 7th B, balance, which acknowledges that parents also have needs. The spirit behind these practices is a reaction against an older tradition of parenting advice that emphasized scheduling, emotional distance, and the concern that responding too readily to a baby's cries would spoil them. In that context, the Sears' message that babies benefit from physical closeness, prompt responsiveness, and feeding on demand was pushing back against a real problem. The spoiling theory had no scientific basis, and the Searses were right to challenge it. So at the level of general philosophy, the approach isn't unreasonable. Responding to your baby, staying physically close. Don't ignore distress. These are things that developmental research supports. The question is whether the specific practices they prescribe are what actually produces secure attachment, and whether they were justified in naming it the way they did. Martha Sears has been direct about why they chose the term attachment parenting. She said they needed something more positive than earlier terminology they'd been using, and that they chose it because, and this is her own phrasing, the attachment theory literature was so well researched and documented by John Bowlby and others. That's a telling admission. The name was chosen because attaching it to Bowlby's research would lend it credibility. The practices themselves weren't derived from that research, they were arrived at through clinical observation, personal experience, and the Sears' own parenting of 8 children. The attachment theory literature was invoked as a kind of endorsement, not as a source. That matters because people reading the name naturally assume the connection runs deeper than it does. If something is called attachment parenting, the reasonable inference is that following it will produce secure attachment as the developmental tradition understands it. And that's where the evidence gets complicated. What does the developmental research say actually produces secure attachment? The consistent finding, replicated across decades of research and across different measurement approaches, is that the key predictor of secure attachment is caregiver sensitivity. Specifically, the caregiver's ability to notice what the baby is communicating, interpret it accurately, and respond in a way that's appropriate and timely. This is Ainsworth's sensitivity hypothesis, and it has held up well as the best available explanation for why some children become securely attached and others don't. Sensitivity, in this sense, is a quality of the interaction, how attuned and how responsive the parent is in the actual moment of contact with the child. It is not a checklist of practices. You can breastfeed and do it mechanically, barely making eye contact, distracted, going through the motions. You can bottle feed and do it with full attentiveness, reading the baby's cues, making the interaction feel safe and warm. The feeding method is not the point. The quality of the interaction is the point. Alan Sroufe, a developmental psychologist who ran the Minnesota longitudinal study, one of the longest running attachment studies in existence, addressed the baby bees directly. He said, "These are all fine things, but they're not the essential things. There is no evidence that they are predictive of a secure attachment." The Minnesota longitudinal study found that secure attachment comes primarily from consistent parental responsiveness and the repair of misattunements, the moments when a caregiver gets it wrong and then corrects course. Perfect responsiveness isn't what's needed. Good enough, consistent responsiveness with the capacity to notice and repair ruptures is what the data points to. None of that is captured by whether you bed share or wear your baby in a carrier. A parent who does all the baby bees but is chronically stressed, emotionally unavailable, or struggling with their own unresolved attachment history is not necessarily providing the sensitive caregiving that the research shows matters. And a parent who formula feeds and uses a crib but is genuinely warm, attuned, and responsive is doing what the research says actually counts. There's also a practical problem with attachment parenting as it's often presented, which is the burden it places on caregivers, particularly mothers. The implicit message of many of the baby bees is continuous physical availability, bed sharing, baby wearing, feeding on demand, avoiding separation. For some parents in some circumstances, that's workable and even enjoyable. For others, it's exhausting, isolating, or simply incompatible with their life. And if a mother is depleted, resentful, or anxious because of the demands the philosophy places on her, that affects the quality of the interaction she's having with her baby, which is exactly what the research says matters most. So, where does that leave attachment parenting? The core instinct behind it, that babies need responsive, physically close caregiving, and that their distress signals are communications worth responding to, is sound. And it was a useful correction to an earlier era of advice that told parents to hold back. In that sense, the movement has probably done some good. But the specific practices the Searses prescribe aren't what attachment theory actually endorses. They're a set of culturally specific choices, some reasonable, some more questionable from a research standpoint, that borrowed the name of a well-established scientific tradition to give themselves authority they hadn't earned from that tradition. The attachment researchers themselves have largely been clear about this. Secure attachment comes from sensitivity, not from any particular set of behaviors. If you take one thing from this video, it's probably this. The question to ask about any parenting practice isn't, does this fit the attachment parenting framework? It's, is this helping me be more present, more attuned, and more responsive to this specific child? That's the question the research actually supports. Hey guys, pretty soon YouTube is going to make it even harder for YouTube creators to support themselves. If you like this content, please subscribe and share it with friends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.